So this week, Politico published a piece titled Brendan Carr's Equal Time Curveball Crashes the Midterms. And earlier, the FCC had threatened broadcast license for networks not giving favorable coverage of the Iran war. So I wanted to know how we got here. So I went to Matt GPT.
Matt GPT. I have a question. Can the FCC pull a broadcast license for unfavorable war coverage?
In March 2026, President Trump posted on Truth Social complaining about coverage of the Iran war, called it fake news, said the media actually wants us to lose the war. Within hours, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr posted this response. Broadcasters that are running hoaxes and news distortions, also known as fake news, have a chance now to correct course before their license renewals come up. The law is clear. Broadcasters must operate in the public interest, and they will lose their license if they do not. Now, you may be thinking, can they actually do that? Is it legal? Does the Constitution have something to say about this? It's worth asking, especially since Carr himself said in 2021 a newsroom's decision about what stories to cover and how to frame them should be beyond the reach of any government official. But first, let's get into some history. Let's go back to the foundation of our country, the basis of all this, the First Amendment. 5 freedoms, 1 sentence, religion, speech, press, assembly, petition. Why those 5? Because every single one of them was something the British Crown had taken from the colonists. Under British rule, you could not operate a printing press without a government license. The Crown issued it. The Crown could revoke it. Print something the king didn't like, license gone, business gone. The founders had lived it, so they wrote the First Amendment to make sure it could never happen here. It only took 7 years for someone to try anyway. In 1798, Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Act, which made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, or malicious writings against the government or the President of the United States. It sparked a heated debate among the very people who wrote the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson argued that in a republic, the people are sovereign, not the government. The people must be able to criticize their government, especially on matters of war, especially when the pressure to demand loyalty over truth is at its highest. James Madison went further. The press must be completely free from government coercion. No exceptions for wartime, no exceptions for national security, no exceptions. And then there's Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton actually supported the Sedition Act. His argument was that the First Amendment prohibited government from censoring speech before it was published. But he believed the government could punish speech after the fact if it was false and malicious. Publish the truth, fully protected. Publish lies about the government during a national security crisis, different story. In Hamilton's framework, truth is an absolute defense. Lies are not. History, the courts, and 2 centuries of First Amendment law have sided with Jefferson and Madison, not Hamilton. But here's the thing about Hamilton that matters for today. Even Hamilton, the founder most sympathetic to federal power, the one who thought you could punish false speech, never argued that government could compel favorable coverage. Punishing lies is one thing, demanding praise is something else entirely. The First Amendment held, but the battlefield kept changing. By the 1920s, radio was everywhere, stations popping up all over the country. Without any rules, broadcasters are literally overpowering each other on the dial. Pure chaos. So in 1934, Congress created the Federal Communications Commission. The idea was simple. Government manages the airwaves, not the content. And it worked until 1949 when the FCC created the Fairness Doctrine. Now, broadcasters must present balanced coverage of controversial topics. It started with radio and moved on to television. In practice, it meant this. If you want your broadcast license renewed, make sure your coverage doesn't make anyone in Washington uncomfortable. And it wasn't just theory. The Kennedy administration used it. The Johnson administration used it. The Nixon administration used it. All of them used it to pressure broadcasts covering their opponents. Then in 1987, Ronald Reagan's FCC killed the Fairness Doctrine. The reason was simple. Government had no business telling a broadcaster what to say. The First Amendment is not a balancing requirement. It is a prohibition on government interference. And what happened the moment government got out of the newsroom? Rush Limbaugh. 1988, 3 hours a day, 30 million listeners, the most influential voice in conservative media for 3 decades, built entirely on the foundation Reagan created. And Rush spent years warning his audience about the one threat that could destroy everything Reagan built: government using licensing power to pressure broadcast content. He said if the fairness doctrine ever came back in any form, it would be the end of free speech in American broadcasting. He was right. He just didn't see where the threat would come from. Brendan Carr wrote the media chapter of Project 2025. The first 7 words of that chapter: the FCC should promote freedom of speech. Since becoming FCC chairman, he has launched formal investigations of nearly every major broadcast network in America: ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, every major network except for one, Fox News. When Jimmy Kimmel made comments critical of Trump, Carr suggested local stations risked their licenses for airing the show. 2 of the largest broadcast groups in America pulled Kimmel from their programming. CBS lawyers advised Colbert not to air an interview with the Democrat Senate candidate over fears of an FCC equal time violation. But what makes this movement feel different to a lot of Americans is that it's not just one thing. It's the systematic use of executive power to control not just what the press covers, but what Americans can say, see, and do.
That was an amazing backgrounder on this and really fills in a lot of gaps for how we got to where we are and what the law is supposed to be. And one of the things I really appreciated that I want to call out is your citation of Rush Limbaugh. I think it's an important thing for conservatives, for Republicans, and they're not always the same thing these days, to hear from you, a Republican operative. You've run more Republican campaigns. You've done more work for the Republican Party than most people could in their dreams. What the actual conservative principle is supposed to be, for me as a Democrat, I want to acknowledge the fact that hearing Rush Limbaugh's name is like taking a cheese grater to my earballs. And I feel like most Democrats are probably on the same page with me about that. But that's sort of the point, that the First Amendment is supposed to protect offensive speech. The First Amendment is supposed to protect Larry Flynt. It's supposed to protect the Westboro Baptist Church. It's supposed to protect neo-Nazis. It's supposed to protect speech that is not otherwise defamatory and false. What's the message that you want your fellow Republicans, who still consider themselves to be traditional Republicans, not necessarily MAGA yahoos?
It has been fundamental to Republicans for such a long time that government should get out of the way, that it should be smaller. I set this up with Reagan first because he was the one that got rid of the fairness doctrine, and without the fairness doctrine, you don't get Rush Limbaugh. And I use Rush a lot of times because so many conservatives and so many people that are now in the MAGA movement or who may support what's happening did spend those 3 hours a day listening to him. Now we've morphed that. And so my message to conservatives is that we're going about this the wrong way. As conservatives, we've always felt like every time conservatism has been tried, it's worked. But now we seem to want to stack the deck because we didn't like what happened with social media. We didn't like the algorithms were pushing not our message. That's all bullshit. The issue and the message I'd make to every single Republican that continues to listen to me is that our strength is our values. When we now starting to use the federal government as a tool to limit speech or as a tool to limit the press, we're going down a dangerous path. Because again, we may think about this as, oh, this is great because we're going to get our message out, but we will not be in power forever.
I think there's a page you could take here out of another luminary for Republicans, Charlie Kirk. Not someone who I necessarily admired, definitely did not agree with, but there's something admirable about going to a college campus and putting up a big banner in front of you that says, "Prove me wrong."
Right.
That's what the First Amendment is supposed to be about, is trying to prove via argument your opponents wrong, and maybe not just trying to prove them wrong, but trying to convince them, which is sometimes a different exercise. That's what we're about. It's about trying to make a case. For example, you just put out there that wherever it's been tried, conservatism works. I don't know that's necessarily the case. I might draw a counterexample to Sam Brownback, the governor of Kansas, who in 2013 decided to eviscerate all taxes. And lo and behold, it completely crashed the balance sheet of the state. And it turned out that was not a very conservative move to make nor a very wise one, and it promptly had to be undone. The point is, we're supposed to be having a conversation about this. At worst, an argument about it.
Right.
And taking this brittle, fragile, scared, oh no, I'm such a delicate doily, please don't say unflattering things about me, is a sign of weakness. And I'd like to suggest that it leads down another road. There's a historic parallel that I think we can draw here to the Pentagon Papers. That was a top secret 7,000 page Department of Defense study done through the Rand Corporation, which is a think tank, back in the 60s, which detailed U.S. political and military involvement in Vietnam. And that study was leaked by Daniel Ellsberg to the New York Times in 1971, and it revealed that 4 presidential administrations had systematically lied to Congress and the public about our level of involvement in Vietnam. Now, this was subject eventually to a Supreme Court ruling in New York Times Company versus United States that found that the government could not exercise prior restraint, could not prevent publication simply to prevent embarrassment of public officials or to justify policies. They upheld freedom of the press. But the important tie-in here is that the Nixon White House was so fragile, so scared, such delicate doilies, so afraid of embarrassment and the undermining of their position on the war in Vietnam, that they created the White House Plumbers Group to stem the leaks. And their illegal activities is what led to the Watergate scandal and the fall of a president. The analogy might fall apart a little bit at this point, 50 years and more on, because it seems like the ability to shame a president for their illegal activities or to get their congressional allies to say, no, this has gone far enough, sir. You need to resign, sir. I think we may have lost that gene, but you can see how this is the pathway that leads to the end of presidencies. Fear of reporting of the First Amendment, of how the media is going to treat the way you prosecute a war, has led to the fall of a presidency before, and it's not impossible that it could again.
That's the through line of everything that we've talked about here, is that what makes our country great and the reason it works is really primarily the First Amendment. Americans are the boss. The government is accountable to the people. When one side puts their thumb on the scale and that side is the federal government and they start suppressing information, now it's not a government that's accountable to the people. It's a government that does whatever the hell it wants to do. And it is dangerous because you do get the Pentagon Papers if you don't have that. You do get the fact that we hide and we deceive and our government does things that it shouldn't do. And that is un-American.
And let's close out on this. It's such a sign of fear and ignorance because it is true that 64% of Americans still get their news, part of their news, from television, which the FCC does regulate. 86% get their news from digital sources, which the FCC does not regulate. If you're listening to the sound of my voice or looking at the wonderful sight of our faces right now, you are on a platform that the FCC does not regulate. And that means we can say whatever the hell we want, and Brendan Carr can't do a damn thing about it. That whiny little mafioso baby, Brendan Carr, can't do anything about speech he doesn't like.